There were numerous theories about what happened to this young college student, but it would take decades to finally get to the truth. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kaitlyn Arquette. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to my channel, I tell multiple true crime stories here every single week, so please feel free to subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok if you want to follow those two pages that I have over there. The links to them will be in the link tree in the description of this video below. The links will also pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end of the video, so feel free to check it out if you want to. And then I also sell merch if you're into that. I sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. You can also find that in the link tree below. We do ship all over the entire world, so it's there if you want to look for it. And then lastly, if there is a case you would like me to cover, just send me a quick little email. Email also listed below. Just send me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I have well over 6,000 names on that list now. It may be a while before I get to your case, but I will get to it eventually. I pick my cases that I cover at random, to be fair, so it's just sort of like a crapshoot. But anyway, let's get into today's case. Kaitlyn Arquette was born on September 18th, 1970, and she was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Kaitlyn's mom was actually a well-known mystery novel author. Her name was Lois Duncan. Kaitlyn grew up in a pretty big family. She had siblings that they all got along with. It was a really loving household. Kaitlyn never really seemed to get in any kind of trouble or anything like that. She was just a really nice and very accepting person. She accepted everyone. By the time this case happened, she had just recently graduated from Highland High School, which was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Kaitlyn actually graduated as an honors student. She got solid grades, 4.0 GPA, and the outgoing and super popular high school student had been recently accepted into the University of New Mexico. She had actually already started taking college courses while doing her senior year. Over that summer before college, she would get a job at Pier 1 Imports. She actually started as a supervisor in the clothing department there. Her goal was to eventually attend medical school because she wanted to become a doctor, and she certainly had the smarts for it. Right around the time she had graduated from high school and was about to head into college, she started dating a man named Dong Nguyen. He was a Vietnamese immigrant. He was actually 8 years older than Kaitlyn, but both Kaitlyn and Mr. Nguyen told Kaitlyn's parents that he was only 4 years older. They knew that Kaitlyn's parents would not accept this relationship if he was significantly older, like 8 years older. And so they lied to make it seem like it was okay. And Kaitlyn's mom and dad, they welcomed Mr. Nguyen into their lives. They said that he seemed like a sweet guy. He was nice, and they quickly kind of grew affectionate towards him. Kaitlyn, after high school, moved into her own apartment, and this is because she actually got money from some kind of insurance settlement. And once she got her own apartment, Dong Nguyen moved in with her. The two of them seemed to have a really good relationship, at least at first. But 6 weeks after him moving in with her, Kaitlyn would go to her mom, Lois, and she would say, we're having some really serious problems right now, we're fighting, and so if he calls here looking for me, just tell him I'm somewhere else. Don't tell him where I'm at. Lois was like, well, I don't really like lying to him. What's going on? And Kaitlyn just said, can we just not talk about it? Let's just, we're fighting. She told Lois pretty much after this big fight they had that she was planning on breaking up with Mr. Nguyen, and she was going to essentially kick him out of the apartment. Kaitlyn told Lois that she was not planning to go back to the apartment that particular day when she said this to her mom. And after being at her mom's house, Kaitlyn would go to a friend's house sometime around 9 or 9:30 p.m. She told the friend that she was, quote, furious at Mr. Nguyen. Then Kaitlyn would leave the friend's house around 10:45 p.m. and she left in her 1984 red Ford Tempo, a car she loved. So this is July 16th, 1989 in Albuquerque. Around the intersection of Broadway Northeast at approximately 10:50 p.m., What police believed happened at that point is that Caitlyn was in her car. She pulled up to a stoplight. It was a red light. And then what they initially thought happened was that somebody pulled up right next to her, took out a gun, and fired 4 shots at her car, 2 of them striking Caitlyn directly in her head. There was a large gunshot entry point into the driver's side door of her car. The window was shattered. And Caitlyn, again, according to what they think initially happened, as she got shot, she drove basically straight into a telephone pole and crashed the car. About 10 minutes after this happened, at 11 p.m., police are responding to the scene because they were made aware of what appeared to be a car accident. However, shortly after police arrived, they realized this was no accident. Caitlyn was still alive, and she was rushed to the hospital. Her parents were notified that she had been in an accident. The police told her it was an accident. But when the parents arrived at the hospital, they also learned very quickly this was no accident. This was someone who had attempted to murder Caitlyn. Caitlyn was in a coma, and she would never regain consciousness. Kaitlyn Arquette would soon be pronounced deceased at the hospital. And again, this was due to 2 gunshot wounds directly to her head. Within hours of all of this occurring, police would go to the apartment that she shared with her boyfriend, Mr. Nguyen, and they would immediately ask him questions like, "Where were you tonight?" By Mr. Nguyen's account, he had been hanging out with some friends until about 10 p.m. The friends then dropped him off at the apartments that he lived at with Caitlyn. And then after 10 p.m., he was home alone in his apartment, completely unaware that Caitlyn had been shot 50 minutes or so after he arrived back at the apartment. Police searched the apartment, and they found a note on top of the table. The note read, quote, "Hun, where are you? I know you're still mad. I'm so sorry, okay? I missed you today. I went to Mom's house to return these books. I'll see ya. Love." End quote. Mr. Nguyen said, well, it appeared to have been written by Caitlyn. It certainly sounded like it came from her. He did tell police that he and Caitlyn did have some arguments earlier that day, but he was not aware that Caitlyn was planning to break up with him, and he was certainly not aware that Caitlyn was planning on kicking him out of the apartment. This was apparently news to him once police were talking to him, because Lois had told police this information by the time they got to interview him. They did test his hands for gunshot residue. It was negative. He had no gunshot residue whatsoever on him. Once the police left, Mr. Nguyen went straight to the hospital, which is confirmed by Caitlyn's parents. He arrived there and he was literally by her bedside the entire time until they would pronounce her deceased. 5 days after Caitlyn's death, Mr. Nguyen takes a knife and he stabs himself in his stomach. He would end up being rushed to the hospital and surviving his injuries. But this was, according to him, a suicide attempt. He was so distraught and so upset by what happened to Caitlyn that he decided to take his own life. From the get-go, police would essentially believe that this was a random act of violence. As a matter of fact, 6 months into the investigation, they announced publicly that they believed that what happened to Caitlyn was an act of randomness, that it was not tied to anything else, that this was a wrong place, wrong time situation for Caitlyn. But Lois Duncan refused to believe that that's what happened to her daughter, because Lois would essentially conduct her own investigation into her daughter's death, and she uncovered some stuff, like some stuff involved with Dung Nguyen. And Mr. Nguyen was allegedly involved in this, I guess, Vietnamese gang that wasn't really a gang, but they were doing illegal activities in the sense of they were committing insurance fraud. They had this very lucrative car insurance scam where they would deliberately get themselves involved in car accidents. And in all of these accidents, the person who actually crashed the car would no longer be found at the scene. The people who were hit in the other car would all come out with like injuries. They had back problems, neck problems. And there was a doctor that would confirm all of these injuries. And it turns out this doctor was a part of this scam. There was evidence uncovered by Lois that Kaitlyn Arquette may have actually been helping do this, but was not aware of how extensive and how deep this scam went. In March of 1989, Mr. Nguyen staged a car accident involving a car that Kaitlyn had used Lois Duncan's credit card to rent. And it was all successful. Mr. Nguyen and his little group were paid out some pretty decent money. And that insurance settlement I mentioned earlier that was used to rent the apartment was part of this insurance scam. But Lois took this along with the fact that Kaitlyn was deciding to break up with Mr. Nguyen and also planning to kick him out of the apartment. Well, if that's the case, Kaitlyn has inside information about this insurance scam. She may not know everything, but she is someone who could potentially expose this scam and get a whole bunch of people, including Mr. Nguyen, in trouble. So what she initially believed, Lois, was that Kaitlyn may have been killed by a hired assassin or someone in this group to take her out before she can say anything to anyone. According to one of Kaitlyn's friends, this friend claimed she got a call the night of the accident, and this call was apparently from Mr. Nguyen. And he said to the friend, "Kate's dead, they shot her." But this was before police informed him of the shooting, if they are to believe what this friend said. When he had attempted to end his own life, Lois visited him in the hospital, and according to her, she told him, "I think I know who did this to Kaitlyn, and it's now up to you to tell the truth, tell what you know." And according to Lois, he responded after a few seconds of silence by saying, "I know, I'm just deciding." But then when police would later question him down the road, he denied having anything to do with any of this, including this insurance scam. Lois then discovers during her own investigation that there were 3 phone calls made from Kaitlyn's apartment. According to Lois, these phone calls came out of the apartment the same time Kaitlyn died. But at that time, Mr. Nguyen was at the hospital. And so they knew it wasn't obviously Kaitlyn who made those calls, and it wasn't Mr. Nguyen. So who has access to their apartment? Who's making all of these phone calls? And these phone calls were being made to someone in Santa Ana. And they found out that this was to a paralegal that had potential involvement in this insurance scam that Mr. Nguyen was involved in. As a matter of fact, this paralegal was the person who was actually setting up these accident scenarios. He was the one planning them and arranging them. Lois hires a private investigator to look more into the relationship between Kaitlyn and Mr. Nguyen. According to a neighbor of Kaitlyn's, it appeared that Kaitlyn was not just upset with Mr. Nguyen, but actually appeared to be afraid of him. And also afraid of the friends that he always had at the apartment. According to a neighbor and also, I guess, the landlord of the apartment building, Kaitlyn would divulge to them that she was uncomfortable and at times scared of the friends because the friends would be speaking in Vietnamese to Mr. Nguyen while around Kaitlyn, and she didn't know what they were saying. And she sometimes felt like they were saying some maybe terrifying things, but they also were making fun of her and laughing at her. And that would lead into arguments with the boyfriend. She didn't like these friends, and they clearly didn't like her either. Kaitlyn, I guess, right before this accident happened, was telling people that she absolutely regretted having the boyfriend move in with her. That it was a huge mistake. She never should have done it. She wanted to kick him out of the apartment so that she can have one of her friends move in with her. And that was her plan. She told the landlord of the apartment building that she was going to be forcing Mr. Nguyen to move out of the apartment and that someone else would be moving in. The private investigator got a hold of that note that was found by police at the apartment the night of the accident, and it was clear to most people that this note was not in Kaitlyn's known handwriting. It just appeared to be off. And they looked at that note along with an absolutely known sample of Kaitlyn's handwriting, and it did appear to be 2 different styles of handwriting. And also there were misspellings in the original notes that Kaitlyn never would have made. The landlord would then tell police that there in fact were 3 people inside of the apartment And they were in there drinking and laughing. And when obviously Caitlyn at this point is being pronounced dead and Mr. Nguyen is at the hospital with them, and this lines up with those 3 phone calls that were made from the apartment. Even though all of this seems to point towards a potential like hired hit that Mr. Nguyen found out about, the potential breakup and being kicked out of the apartment. And so maybe he told the rest of the gang to take care of Caitlyn, you know, but police refuse to really ever accept that as the possibility. They still continue to say that they believe that this was a random act of violence. And the police investigation was completely going away from the Vietnamese angle and going into a completely different direction. In November of 1989, a tip came in to Crime Stoppers that there was a man named Juvenal Escobedo. Well, he was the man seen driving the car, I guess by some witness, that eventually flagged down Caitlyn and shot her. And that another man, an 18-year-old named Miguel Garcia, was in the passenger seat. And it was him who fired the shots. And then a third individual named Robert Garcia, who's not related to Miguel Garcia, well, police were told that this Robert Garcia has information and they should talk to him. And he actually would tell police that he was in the car with Miguel and Juvenal and can confirm that they were the ones who shot at Caitlyn and killed her. And so with this, all 3 of these men are arrested and all 3 of them are charged with first-degree murder. But this would not last long. While there were people who claimed that these men were bragging about killing Caitlyn, police still needed more to actually go forward with a trial and everything. So they put a tape recorder in the jail cell that these men were in, and they never actually caught them saying that they had anything to do with this. As a matter of fact, this tape recorder only caught conversations where all 3 men were denying having anything to do with this, that the confessions were false. They were a lie. But they were also driving a car, a Camaro, that was seen the night of the accident, or the shooting, by a truck driver. A truck driver said they saw what looked like a Camaro chasing another car that looked like Caitlyn's car around this neighborhood around 9:30 or 10 p.m. But the problem with that is that Caitlyn wasn't on the road between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. She was confirmed to be at a friend's house, and the accident didn't occur until about 10:50 p.m. And so if the 3 men were driving in the Camaro and that's what the truck driver saw, then they saw something totally different. The truck driver did, not the incident with Caitlyn. But police were still convinced, maybe the truck driver just got the times wrong. And they believed that these 3 men were just out joyriding and just so happened to drive up next to Caitlyn and said, you know what, let's kill her. But then eventually Robert Garcia would recant everything he said. He said he told police the information about being in the car with all the shooting happening. He said that because that's what he felt police wanted him to say. And so that's why he said it. But he then would later say that none of it was true. He was also kind of drunk when he said these things. But also, they would come to the conclusion that the statements that they were giving about the shooting, like almost none of it made sense. They got virtually every aspect of the crime wrong. And then when police searched their home, they found several weapons, and not a single one of them matched the crime scene in terms of the bullets that were likely used. These men were in jail based on these allegations and all of this for about 15 months. But by April of 1991, all of the charges against these men were dropped, and it wasn't them. Turns out they were lying, and they made it up because they felt pressure by the police. By this time, the police have now questioned Dong Nguyen with regards to this Vietnamese gang insurance scam group, and eventually he admitted to all of that. He said it was true that they were a part of this, that there was an insurance scam going on, but he said it had nothing to do with whatever happened to Caitlyn, and he continued to deny having anything to do with her death or asking anyone to kill her. And I think they've even questioned some members of this group, and they all denied having anything to do with it. And they never had any proof or actual physical evidence to connect any of them, including Mr. Nguyen, to the murder, despite Lois believing that this has to be it, that this has to be the motive, the reason why this all happened. By 1992, Lois Duncan, she writes a book called Who Killed My Daughter, and she is just adamant about finding out who did this. And after the release of the book, a man named Dennis Martinez would come forward to police to say that he was the one to do this, and he was hired by this Vietnamese gang to kill Caitlyn. But then he recants that entire statement by saying he was completely drunk when he said that, and none of it was true. And again, they never had any physical evidence connecting him to it. By 1995, after this case is featured on several television shows, it was a high-profile case because, Lois is this well-known author. Well, after an airing of one of these episodes, the private investigator that was working with Lois got information about a man named Paul Apodaca. Well, that name is very familiar to them because Paul Apodaca was actually at the crime scene the night of the accident. I didn't mention him earlier because the police never did. The police never looked at this guy as a suspect. They never did anything to him. He was just there. I guess he was there pretending like he was trying to help Caitlyn after the incident took place, that he didn't see anything. And police never regarded him as a suspect, and no one really ever knew about him. He initially told police that he just happened to be passing by, saw the aftermath, and was there when police arrived, and that was it. In 1995, Mr. Apodaca was actually convicted of sexually assaulting his 14-year-old family member. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but was released early. But they didn't have any physical evidence once his name came up of him actually being involved in this particular crime. By 2003, a cold case team is looking at this case, and they look at all the crime scene photos, and they notice that there are scratches and dents along one side of Caitlyn's car that indicated that some other car had likely run her off the road, had smashed into her from the side to purposely drive her off the road. And then through all these photos, they realized that she likely crashed into the telephone pole first. And based on the gunshot entry wounds to her head, based on the crime scene photos and everything, it looks like they were fired from close range, and they were fired from a non-moving object into Caitlyn as she was also not moving, meaning that this person drove her off the road, purposely had her car crash, got out of their car with a gun and fired several shots into her. They probably fired a shot or two at the car to try to force her off the road first, and that's why she had those gunshots in the car, but she was shot and killed after the crash. Meanwhile, fast forwarding to 2012, Paul Apodaca is arrested and charged again with assaulting a girlfriend and stealing her car. He got 12 years in prison for that, but was released early. Then in July of 2021, he is arrested again for other crimes, and when he is arrested this time, he confesses. He was the one to kill Kaitlyn Arquette. And it wasn't just her. He killed 2 other women at least. He murdered another University of New Mexico student named Althea Oakley. She was stabbed to death way back in June of 1988, and that case went unsolved until now. Then he admitted to murdering another person that happened in September of 1988, a 13-year-old child. Her name was Stella Gonzalez. He then also admitted to committing 3 other rapes in the early 1990s. And eventually, once he confesses, the DNA from those rapes would match him. So in August of 2021, he is officially arrested for the murders of Althea Oakley, Stella Gonzalez, and Kaitlyn Arquette. He said he absolutely hated women, and that's why he did this. He was so tired of being the nice guy and seeing women only go after bad guys and dating, bad men. And he was tired of being rejected, and so he developed this hatred for women, and that's why he did the things he did. When he was confessing to Caitlyn's murder, he got everything spot on. Things that nobody knew in the public, he got every detail correct. It's like he was reliving it the moment it happened all these years later. He had absolutely nothing to do with Caitlyn's boyfriend. He had absolutely nothing to do with this other group of guys who they had questioned and arrested and had in a jail cell for 15 months. Nothing to do with them. He was, in fact, a random person. This was, in fact, a random act of violence. As a matter of fact, Kaitlyn Arquette was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unbelievably, the police's suspicions from the very get-go were correct. However, the fact that they never looked at this guy from the start of it is kind of baffling. Typically, when there's someone at a crime scene, especially something as violent as this, you at least want to question them pretty thoroughly. At the very least, do your due diligence, but they didn't really ever appear to do that. They only just questioned him at the scene with vague questions and then let him go. and never ever brought him back in. So in the end, this had nothing to do with the insurance scam. This was not a hired hit. This was just Kaitlyn was shot and killed by a man who hated women, who just so happened to cross paths with her that night. And she left her friend's house 10 minutes earlier or later, this probably never would have happened, right? This is one of those things where it all comes down to a matter of like seconds or minutes. Had a person not been in that area at that time, she would not have crossed paths with him. And that's always kind of like scary to think about, how close any of us could be to something like this happening. Unfortunately, in June of 2016, Lois Duncan passed away, and this was before she ever actually knew for sure what happened to her daughter. She never actually got to see justice play out. She never got to see the man arrested for this. One of Kaitlyn's sisters would actually end up becoming a criminologist because of this case, and some of her family did at least get to see justice done. Because actually, as of just this year, January of 2024, Paul Apodaca would end up taking a plea deal of second-degree murder to the murder of Kaitlyn Arquette, and also the murders of Althea Oakley and Stella Gonzalez, and he was sentenced, kind of unbelievably, to just 45 years in prison. It took several decades, and unfortunately, they appear to be on the wrong track for the entire investigation, but eventually the truth came out. And you wish this is one of those things where the truth could have come out a lot sooner, but it just didn't. And because of that, this man was essentially allowed to commit more sexual assaults and who knows how many other potential murders. I mean, this guy's a serial killer. Kaitlyn Arquette was technically the last of the 3 murder victims that they are aware of. And so arresting him then would not have prevented the other 2 murders, but it would have prevented some more horrific crimes against other women. But in the end, it took decades, but Kaitlyn Arquette finally got the justice she rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case, True Crime, Maroony Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, follow me over on TikTok, check out the merch store, and recommend a case to my email address. All of that information you can find below in the description. And that is time for me to say and sing goodbye. I always sing when I say goodbye. No, I don't. If you're new here, I don't sing because I'm terrible at singing, especially the word goodbye. Was that beautiful? Was that good? Was that beautiful or no? Okay. Well, that's fine. It's fine. Anyway.